My, this is a big crowd. Okay, now I'm scared. Let me tell you, my young friends, holiday gatherings used to be different. There was a time when the festive table was free of conspiracy theories, gender pronoun complaints, and sports talk. Back in the day, when the meal was done, a wagon load of family stories would roll through the parlor. As the logs crackled in the fireplace, stories of heroic grandmas and odd uncles, of possibly royal relatives and legendary ancestors would fill the room like sweet-smelling smoke. And they were all, or very nearly all, a pack of monstrous lies. Picture my disappointment when, in my early 20s, I began to learn the truth about my family. Here's what you need to know. My mother, Joan, was an only child, and she was, on the whole, a pretty truthful person. So I'm really talking about the large, loud, lovable immigrant family she acquired when she married my dad, Tom Naff. His father, Ferris al-Naff, first emigrated to America way back in 1895. At that time, the country he sailed away from was merely a province in the Ottoman Empire. When he arrived here in America, he scraped a living by peddling door to door from the border of Canada all the way down to Texas and then back again. He did this for years until he had accumulated enough money to go back to Lebanon and marry my grandmother, Yumna. Ferris and Yumna began to raise a family, but after a while, they decided to emigrate to America again. So in 1920, Ferris and Yumna, with their two daughters, Wadad and Alixa, set sail for Ellis Island. Once there, they moved on and settled in Detroit, where Ferris and Yumna opened a grocery store and raised their family. In all, 5 children, my dad being the youngest. Now, this much is true, but let me tell you some of what I heard at holiday gatherings. Grandpa Ferris was the namesake of his uncle, a great and noble horseback warrior. Grandma Yumna smuggled her old world yogurt into this country by drying it in a hanky and then reconstituting it with New World milk. Bootleg dairy was just the beginning. On the voyage over from Lebanon, little Wadad caught a cold, and Ferris and Yumna were afraid she would be turned away at Ellis Island. So they rolled her in a Persian carpet and smuggled her in. And get this, my Aunt Alixa once went out on a date with Danny Thomas. Yes, that Danny Thomas, TV star, nightclub comedian, and founder of St. Jude's Hospital. Now, who could possibly believe that Alixa Naff, Detroit Lebanese grocery clerk, went out on a date with Danny Thomas? They might as well have told me that she also went clubbing with Marilyn Monroe or rode around on the back of James Dean's motorcycle. But as a child, I cherished and believed in all of these family stories. Well, as I became an adult, I shed many childhood things: Spider-Man pajamas, lightsabers, and belief in the family tales. There were trace elements of truth in them. It is true, for example, that my grandfather's name, Ferris, which I bear, in Arabic connotes great horsemanship. But he was no warrior, and so far as I can tell, neither were any of his ancestors. It's also true that on the voyage over, little Wadad caught a cold, and Ferris and Yumna were worried about it. But if they had had a Persian carpet, they wouldn't have rolled her up in it. They would have flown her in, right? And as for the yogurt, well, today, smuggling dried yogurt into America from the Middle East, that would be bioterrorism, right? Back then, maybe it happened that way. When it comes to the story of Alixa going out with Danny Thomas, however, no way. I was sure that was all romantic moonshine. My Aunt Alixa was a well-built woman, but I have to tell you, she could be a bit of a hellcat. Not only did she remain single all her life, but in the course of it, she drove away many of her friends and most of her family members by picking ferocious fights with them over and over again. For example, at my college graduation, she got into a blistering argument with my dad over some triviality, where to have lunch or something like that. She threw down a stack of books and stormed out. And my parents never really forgave her. Me, I was kind of amused by it. I knew better than most the strength of character it took to be Alixa Naff, a woman who defied all the expectations of her parents, her culture, and her times. She remained single all her life, but in that role, she traveled all over America and Europe and the Middle East, alone in a VW bug, collecting immigrant stories. Those stories later became the basis of her doctoral thesis, and once she had earned her PhD, she went on to become the founder of the Smithsonian's Arab American Archive. But eventually, old age caught up with her, and having driven away so many people in her life, she turned to me to take care of her in her old age. I gladly said yes. I was honored to do it. She had been kind to me when I was a child, and she took me on some of those adventures of hers. So I was happy to do it, and I did the best I could to make her final years happy ones. When she died in 2013, I organized a family gathering to celebrate her life. Elders from all over gathered in my parents' living room. It was a noisy affair, as partly deaf nonagenarians competed to make themselves heard. Above the din, one story caught my ear. My dad's cousin, Larice, said, "Remember when Alixa went out on a date with Danny Thomas?" "What?" I yelled. "Are you telling me Alixa really had a fling with Danny Thomas?" Larice said, "Oh, Danny, his whole family was Lebanese. We knew them all. He was back in Detroit to visit his little brother, and they went out." They went out? You mean Alixa and Danny Thomas went out? "Well, no, Danny was with this gorgeous blonde, but they went out together." Explain that? "Well, you see, Danny had this great big convertible. Oh, you should have seen it. And he and his gorgeous blonde were in the front, and Alixa and the little brother were in the back." So there you have it, a double date with Danny Thomas's little brother. So my young friends, if the power ever fails during the holidays and your elders begin to tell stories, be sure to listen up. But grab a salt shaker off the table. You may well need a few grains before the night is done.